Start rolling. Okay. Hello and welcome back to In the Mix Studios. Put your hands together. We have a very special guest today. Our guest has flown all the way over from his hometown in Italy, is a mix engineer, has his own studio that he built and has proof of it on his YouTube channel. Not only is he a great content creator and makes good memes on Instagram about how his mixes slap, this man is a fantastic friend, a great teacher, a wonderful mixer, always wears a bow tie, and has even worked with names like Andre 3000, Jay-Z, and most notably recently, Kanye West Donda. This is the GOAT. And we're very, very pleased to be able to host him for this special edition Masterclass, hosted at In the Mix Studios. Everybody put your hands together for Irko!
Thanks, man. Thank you. Good morning, guys. How we doing today? Good. All right. So, we are in what used to be my old neighborhood. I lived around the corner from here when I first moved to LA. I was in the west side, but then I quickly realized that all the studios are in North Hollywood. So, I had to move, right? And so, yeah, I lived literally like a block and a half away from here. So that's really cool that we're back in the same areas, you know. There's studios everywhere here, you know. So it's really cool. But yeah, so today I am here to share these few hours with you guys. And so we can go over things that you might want to be asking, or techniques that we want to explore, or whatever you guys want to do, we can talk about it. I'm an open book. There's no secrets here. Besides where I get my bow ties, that is a secret. No, I'm just kidding. We can talk about whatever you guys want. So we have a Pro Tools session here that's open, so we can take a look at things. You know, whatever you guys wanna look into. But before we get started, I wanna know who's in the room. So I think we should go around so that I can get to know you guys, see who's more of an engineer, who's more of a producer, who's more of a talent, you know, whatever the case may be, so that I can kind of assess who I'm talking to. You know, I want to get to know you guys. I know some of you guys, but, you know, some other ones I want to get to know. As I was saying a little earlier with the guys, sometimes when there's like this, like a lecture format kind of thing, it's more like whatever the person's talking, and maybe that's not exactly what you guys, you know, the kind of information you guys may want. So I want to make sure that I give you exactly what you want, you know. So if you want to just kind of go around, who wants to start?
Let's start here and pass it around.
Yeah, cool.
Sure. All right, my name's Ainsley.
Hey.
Live up in Sacramento, so I actually flew down for this.
What?
Yep.
All right, man.
Special.
All right, high five to that.
Started off as a DJ, moved into production, and now I'm in the audio engineer sphere. So got a degree in it from a community college up in Sac, and just trying to expand my knowledge base and get better.
All right, beautiful, man. Okay. So engineer mostly, huh? All right.
Mostly.
Hey everybody. Hey. My name is Kahari, and I also live down the street.
Oh, no way.
5 minutes away.
Yeah.
Atlanta, good spot. From New York. Been here a couple of years now. I do production and engineering. I like to work with artists, and just make songs and just kind of put them out. So I'm trying to work on doing that.
Gotcha.
I came here just to like meet some more people.
Yeah, of course.
You know, and then hang out with you for a while.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool.
So thank you.
Perfect.
What's up, everyone? My name is Gilbert, or you can call me Gilby. I am from South Central. I have a studio in Long Beach, and mainly started off production when I was little, but moved away from that. Started engineering, recording and mixing, and now I've been slowly getting back into production, but still mainly on the mixing side, so I'm excited to see what mixing techniques you have for us.
Okay, cool. So we got the engineer trio up here, mostly. I know you produce too, but...
How's it going, everybody? My name's JT. Excuse me. I'm also originally from the Bay Area. Shout out to the Bay Area people. But I'm trying to get into tracking vocals, and originally just into production, beat making. And as far as like tracking, it's all new to me. And just looking to build a studio as well. So.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
Thank you, brother.
My name is Javier. I'm an artist. Go by the name of 40 Stacks. I songwrite. I came here from Boston to come see the legend.
Wow.
And I just nothing really comes out right. So I don't know. Everything's leading to doing it myself. So I just kind of want to learn. So, thank you.
Gotcha.
How you guys doing? I'm
Hey.
Roscoe Gray. I call myself Roscoe G. I am a producer, engineer, and beat maker, whatever you want to call it. I pretty much do all three. I only really record myself so I can learn how to mix engineer like this guy here. I built a really incredible studio, and I'm just trying to get the knowledge on how to use it. Well, I know how to use it, but I need all kind of different techniques, and it'd be cool to learn from this guy. Thank you.
You got it.
Good morning. The camera's over there. My name is Eric. I am a singer-songwriter and a budding mixing engineer. And I just wanted to say briefly that Irko, that I found you from Graham from the Recording Revolution. If you're willing to talk about that 4 years ago, and I want you to know that your words stuck with me at least. He asked you for one piece of advice that you can give everybody, and I think you recall you said, stay away from the solo button.
Oh, yes.
And I never forgot that. It was one of the first pieces of info I learned, so still adhere to that. And if you want to talk about it later, that'd be cool.
That's me. Hey everyone, I'm Fabio. I'm originally from Brazil, but I've been living in Berlin for the last 4 years, doing the transition to LA now. I'm mostly focused on production and mixing, and some engineering on the in-between. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Cool.
How's it going, everyone? My name is Steezy, the architect. You could also call me Steezy. I'm a freelancer based out of LA and Hollywood. I'm actually born and raised in Pasadena. It's nice to see you again, Irko.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan, and I'm looking forward to learn from you.
Okay.
My name is Buck Nasty. I'm from Riverside, California, and like the Inland Empire, San Bernardino. And I do a lot of tracking and production for people where I'm from, but I do a lot of artist stuff for myself that I'm like getting a little deeper into that. But a lot of tracking, mixing wise, I'm used to using people's templates, but now I'm trying to kind of figure that out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm bringing one of my cars to Riverside for a car show next weekend, so come around for that one. Oh, I think I got one, so I think I'm good. All right, guys. Well, that's amazing. I love the crowd. I love the diversity. We got people from a little bit everywhere, and even the intent and the attention to what you're trying to do in music is diverse. So that's cool. So I think we should start with the solo button, right? Since you talked about that. It occurred to me that when doing mixes, it's very important to get the sounds of each track right? So say we got a guitar, we got a synth, whatever, I need to perfect each of them so that the whole is improved, right? And so what better way to go and hit the solo on a mixer so that everything else is muted and I can just focus on that, right? That was one of the most retarded shortcuts I could ever come up with, and I'm totally guilty of it because nobody told me that. I was just like, well, shit, bloop. Now I can hear it better, right? The thing is, whenever you work on one track out of the whole song, right, you of course want to make it better. So this guitar, you want to make the biggest, widest, the most bass-heavy guitar, if that's a thing, or if we're talking about a synth, you want to make it the most stereo that you can do it, right? Well, no, that's not how it works. The thing is, the mix is a combination of all of these tracks. If every track is as best as it can be, it'll most definitely interfere with the others, So when you actually end up when you mix a song properly and the song sounds incredible, everything has its place, in the real estate of the stereo. So left to right and middle, of course, and then up to down. So 20,000 ideally to 20 ideally in the lows. That's the frequency range. That's the left and right space that we have. Of course, we have the time variable also, but that's all the space we got. So if we solo the tracks by the time the mix is existing and it's finished, you'll see that a lot of these tracks don't sound that good. The idea, in fact, if we're talking about, for example, a guitar, is to thin it out as much as possible. We're trying to make it as weak as possible so that it can use that little area of the real estate that it will occupy, frequency-wise or stereo-wise, whatever the case. But that's because there's a bunch of other elements that are needed to be fit into that finite space. I often give the parallel or the explanation, the graphical explanation that when I'm a car guy, so I'm gonna go to the cars quite often. You guys bear with me. When you are putting stuff in your trunk, right? That the trunk is finite. That's the space you have. Period. So the best way to go about doing things is to first put the freaking watermelon or whatever, the big stuff, right? And then the medium stuff, and only at the very end you can put your salt or whatever, the little dusty things, the little stuff, say like a piece of paper or something. If you do it the other way around, you're gonna occupy a lot of space with stuff that's less important and not have room for the big stuff. And so this all ties back to that solo thing. Whenever you're soloing, you don't have a reference. So the way I go about this and what I would suggest you guys do, and not because I said so, but because it makes more sense to approach the mix as a song, not as tracks. No, whenever I have my mixes out being heard a billion times, none of those billion plays will be, or most of, 99.9% of those plays are going to be people that don't even know that there is a synth there. My aunt doesn't know about the freaking shaker. She just likes the vibe of the song, you know what I mean? So no one will hear the tracks. They will hear the song. So you got to approach it as a song, and mix it as a song. The best way to go about that is to usually start with all the tracks featured on the song present. Very low, yes, so maybe bring it down to, I don't know, -20, -15. The number doesn't matter. As long as it's low and so that you're not using the range of the mix that we will use eventually, but in the very beginning we're not using it. And then bring up the bass. Okay, now I'm working on the bass guitar. I want to dial in the proper harmonic content for it. Okay, bring it up so it is sitting, say, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 or 10 dBs, whatever, above everything else, so that we are focusing on that one track. So that's fine that we're working on it, but still have everything around it kind of quiet in the background so that whatever choices you make that's applicable to that instrument that you're working on is still informed by everything else that's going to be around it. In the very beginning, also, one thing that I like to decide is the stereo positioning of stuff, right? So I don't want to just leave it to chance or to have this big mono, aka everything is stereo. I'm very, very deliberate with my mixes. If you listen to any of my stuff and really pay attention to the positioning of the stereo, even the mid to the side, I'm a little bit of a hardcore kind of guy with those kind of things. Like I'm not shying away from putting stuff all the way out, even out of phase sometimes, Of course, mind you, that's like breaking the rule. So let's learn the rule first, and then we can break it. So positioning the elements in the stereo and being aware that, okay, in this song, we're going to have guitar 1 all the way left, and this element that's all the way on this side will have some sort of a conversation with another element that's all the way to the right. Okay, now we dictated what's on the sides in the music component, if that's what we're talking about, guitars and synths, right? Most likely the vocal will be in the middle. Most likely the snare and the kick and the bass will be in the middle. And I say most likely because, of course, these things do change. But these are major decisions that we're making when everything is live, no solos, okay? And then from there, you just grow everything else. So yeah, that solo thing, man, I wasted so much time. I think maybe like the first couple of years, it was pointless. It's just being green and just trying to figure it out as I go. Back then there was no internet where I could just talk to somebody and ask. I mean, there was a little bit, but not that much.
So that's where my problem is the stacking of vocals. I like mine to kind of like sound like have a foundation to it. I find a lot of the engineers that I was working with kind of turn my supporting vocals down, and it kind of leaves my main vocal hanging a little bit.
Right.
So that's why.
Yeah, I get it. There's a lot of, it depends on the artist and the vision for the song and everything. Some artists do like that, where you have the main in the middle, very separate from everything else. I have several clients of mine that are like that. All the big rappers that I've worked with, most of them like it like that. Jay-Z is one of them. Kanye is one of them. Kanye specifically doesn't want any reverb on his vocals for the most part. Again, that changes, but that's an example, where they want one track real dry potentially in the middle. That's it, lonely, you know. And there's benefits to that too, you know. Whenever you have a very busy track, you can use that treatment to have the vocal being in front, almost kind of like a band-aid in front of something else, almost, if you know what I mean, right? But then there's other situations where we don't want that at all, you know. Actually, a hybrid of the two is something that you might hear on the song Hurricane that I mixed with The Weeknd, right? With any Weeknd tracks, most likely there's like a wash of vocals with reverbs and delays and modulations and things like that, right? So that will be a situation where he doesn't usually have a lot of harmonies and stuff like that, but it's a one lead that's washed out. So that becomes a very stereo, very, soupy kind of presentation of his vocal, right? And then you have the other ones where it's a bunch of harmonies, a bunch of harmonic content, and there's, even though there is always a lead vocal that, you know, whenever this song has been performed at a stadium or whatever, the people can sing to that melody line, but then you might have a whole bunch of harmonies around it. And then, you know, in that kind of application, it's about creative mix, set of decisions that are being taken, because most likely you want to move these harmonies around the stereo, right? But that's also where the music usually sits. So you got to be a little bit creative with where you're putting things and how heavy driven of a mix you want the harmonies to be versus the leads, you know? Sometimes you got double leads that are stacked, so there is not one track, you know? So it's totally up. But yeah, I would say, you know, there's a lot of communication that needs to happen with whoever your team is. So there's never, or at least in the way I like to work, there's never too much information that's being exchanged between the talent, whether that's producer, artist, singer, doesn't really matter, and the mixer. I always like to do a sit-down virtual, if it's necessary, with whoever has creative control on the record, to do this, you know, to get on the same page with saying, hey, what do you want? This mix, is this like a trim of a haircut, or is this a new style of things? You know, like we want to completely change the landscape of this or not? And sometimes they're very peculiar and they want exactly what's the rough, because they've heard it a million times, you know, for months sometimes, you know. Some other times, like I'm doing the new St. John's album right now, right? With him, he's like, go out, just do your thing, you know. But you know, what does that mean, you know? So, you know, for example, the first record that I did for him was, I felt like the verses could use distortion, heavy distortion on his vocal. And so I did it. And I checked with the producers and him, and they were like, yeah, go for it. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to go balls deep and see what happens. And if there's, you know, if they feel like it's too much, we can always backtrack. There's no ego in my mixes, you know? So these conversations are fluid and they change. You know, when doing 20-some songs, albums, it's a whole movie that you're trying to paint that has different scenes, which are the songs, right? So maybe in one we can go a little bit more this way, and in another one we can go a little bit more that way, you know? But, you know, feel free to communicate with these people, you know? They're not in your head, you're not in their head. Most likely the technicians will have more of a technical kind of approach that sometimes might be very necessary and very important, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's about the vibe, you know? So it's a moving target, you know? Of course.
I was kind of related to the vocals. When you have a vocal, is the idea to bury the vocal in the beat, or have the vocal sitting out in front? And if you do want it to sit out front, you have to heavily compress it in order for it to not sound, you know, blast in your ear. You know what I mean?
I mean, ideally, the perfect mix, whatever that means, would be to have a presentation to where you got the vocal in the middle, kind of like at a concert, like in a show, right? You got the artist in the middle, and then, you know, the music around it, you know, or her, you know? And that's kind of like my thinking is, I would like for all the elements to be able to be digested by the audience, and not one overpower the next one, with a caveat that if there is one that overpowers everything, it should be the lead vocal, right? Because no one will sing the snare. They will sing the song, you know? You know? So if there is a thing, you know, maybe that. But, you know, it depends on the situation, you know. Sometimes you want to have vocals on top. On Donda, for example, Life of the Party is kind of like that. The music to that song sounds like a sample that was just looped. It's not. It really isn't. That session was really, really tall, actually. But the effect was that, to have, you know, basically just like the vibe of DJ style situation where somebody's looping some old sample and some guys just rapping over it, you know. In some other situations, it's very different, and you have the vocals way in the back. I just started a 70s rock and roll band project the other day. Vocal is like way in there, you know. The guitars are like super loud, and I know that that's like an aesthetic thing. It goes, you know, based by genre and even within the album, that may change. You know, I wouldn't do it too much of a drastic change between songs because, like I said, I like to paint a picture of an album, and that's becoming my a little bit of my specialty to do albums where the continuity between the entire thing is very important. So I wouldn't do too much of a drastic difference between songs, you know. But yeah, I mean, I get asked all the time. Also, another thing, I grew up in Italy, right? And in Italy, the mixes over there are very different. Their vocals are always like 5-6 dBs too loud, if you ask me. So that's another thing, you know. It depends on the market. Spanish music, right? Reggaeton, those kicking and snares, way hotter than a bunch of other things, you know. Alternative music, usually you have a lot more music and the vocals are in the back. Doesn't really matter if you're not, if you're missing a couple of words. Usually it's like, oh, no, put it in, you know. So.
You compress it though, like if you do want it out front.
Oh yes.
Compress it a lot to make sure it's not, you know, like it's not hurting your ears.
Right. For sure. The compression is something that you will see all over mixes at different stages and different flavors. It's everywhere. Lead vocals, most likely, I will use, let's see what they have here. Yeah, I will probably use this in its gray form if possible. Now, granted, I'm doing some settings here without any audio or any kind of references, you know, but most likely you will see 90% of my vocals will run through some sort of version of what I'm showing you here. And it'll be a 12-to-1 most likely. It'll be very fast in the attack and the release. Mind you, the 1176 works backwards. Usually it fastest that way. Yeah, I don't know why it's like that. I'm sorry. And then in terms of the gain reduction, that can dramatically change if it's like something that we want to keep somewhat dynamic and you know, more realistic, I guess. It'll reduce maybe like 3, 4, something like in this area here, right? If I want to go a lot more compressed, which definitely happens very often, it's not something strange that I'll go down to 15 or maybe more, you know, or even have stacks of these, you know. It really depends, you know. In fact, whenever you hear a distorted vocal, that's basically what it is. You're just completely slamming it, you know, so that changes. That being said, with this, you know, this is just one of the ingredients that I will use, you know. It happens very often that before this I will have a very hard limiter, say something like, here we go, the most ignorant version of it here, something like that, so that this can take care of any like spikes, any loud syllables that for whatever reason it's a lot louder than so with this I'm completely trimming those louder peaks, and I'm not looking for color here. I'm looking for more of a function kind of thing. Then with this one, especially with the real units, you have this gritty kind of sound that helps a lot in the, I don't know, maybe 1,000 to 5,000 range, which is very important for intelligibility. So yes, all the vocals are most likely compressed and most likely with this kind of setting, most likely. Mm-hmm.
Before you start doing these, before you start adding any processing, are you prepping your sessions before? Like, are you clip gaining? Are you volume fading? Anything? And yeah, that's the question.
So this, of course, vastly depends on the content. So how the tracks look like. If they are completely out of control with dynamic ranges, then yes, I will look into that. I'm not gonna like sit there and, you know, trim every syllable to make it. No, that's too much. You know, it's not too much in a sense that it takes efforts or time. It's just that I'm kind of changing the DNA of the recording too much, you know. So a little bit, yes, but not too much, you know. And most likely, actually, that might happen later. Like once I have done all my treatment and I'm noticing some things, depending if I want to have this interaction with clip gains. Oh, by the way, for those that don't use Pro Tools, clip gain is whenever you can adjust the volume of the actual track before the treatment, and that's the key. If I want to do that movement before the treatment, then I will clip gain it. But most likely, I'll probably do it after my treatment. So with the yellow trim. Oh wait, these shortcuts here are different, but this guy here. So I use the yellow line for volume automations, not the black one. Oh, blue, I guess in this rig. And that's because if I do it on the blue, once I lock in my mix, I can't move it anymore, you know? So instead, if I use the trim right here, the yellow one, I can do whatever automations I got going on, but then when I go back to this, I can change it however I want, you know? So imagine if there's like a vowel that's too loud even after my processing, then most likely I want to keep the processing and just go there and do the automation down, you know? Or say after my compression and my treatments and my boosting of the high frequencies or whatever, all of a sudden a k is a lot louder or a s is too loud, then of course I'll do that after my treatment, you know? But again, you know, both approaches are valid and they have their use depending on the situation. You know? All right. So yeah, so after this, actually before this treatment, most likely on vocals, I will do something like this. Oops, wrong thing. I will use a stationary EQ to remove. To remove any like rumble, any low end information that's deeper than the actual usable one. So, you know, any stumping on the floor kind of thing, anything that will eventually or potentially could trigger the sub to react to that or to inform the compressor to do things. I want to get rid of that. So, you know, again, a rule of thumb, maybe under 70, 80 hertz, something like that, maybe higher sometimes. I get rid of all of that stuff on the vocals because there's no need, you know, and not only there's no use for that kind of information, but that is very powerful data, and that could trigger the compressors to behave in a wonky kind of way that we're not after.
I have another question. As
Yeah.
I'm seeing you open up Pro Tools, when you receive the session from your clients, are you requesting the full session that they used, or do you just ask for the audio files and then you create your own session? And then if you do create your own session, are you creating it with 32-bit, 24-bit, 48 kilohertz,
Okay.
41?
Okay. All my work is at 48 kilohertz and 24 bits. I find that is the sweet spot between quality and taxing the CPU for plugins and, you know, any computer aspect of the thing, right? What will be sent to me, it can be anything, you know. Most likely it will be, there is not, I was going to say most likely, there is no most likely, it really depends. But if it is a Pro Tools session that I'm about to receive, I will inform the recording engineer, the producer, or whoever's sending it to me, to just leave it as is. Just send me what you got. Like the latest version of the song, send me the files. I like to start where they stopped. So I'm not one of those mixers where they ask for everything to be stripped off. I don't. In fact, you know, there's some of my colleagues that request color coding and naming. I don't, you know, that's why I have my guys to prep everything for me. Because why, you know, giving a task to whoever's on the other side of this, and you never know who's on the other side of this, you know. So sometimes it's people that we're on the same page, we can actually talk Pro Tools and stuff. Some other times they're not. Sometimes the sessions come from FL Studio, DAW, so there's no, it's all different, right? But the number one thing is to have everything multi-track. Second order of importance is to have all their treatment. with a caveat again, if there's like reverbs that are all over the sessions or whatever, I would like to have those separate if possible, or maybe just a wet and dry folder, whatever works, right? But the default for me is to start with their treated audio, you know, so that I can start with where they took the song to and where they presumably are happy with it. Unless they're not, and then of course, again, communication, right? The call that I do beforehand is always like that. Once I have all the tracks, oh, by the way, multi-track files for everything / Pro Tools session with everything separate, but very important is for me to get the rough mix also. So whether if that's an MP3 or WAV, whatever, I actually prefer an MP3 so that I can actually hear it on my phone and on my laptop without going through the sessions and stuff. I like to get to know the song way before I start moving faders. And I want the song to know me too, you know, like it's a conversation we're gonna have for 2 days, you know, so I wanna make sure that we're on the same page and getting familiar with how the song is structured, what, which components do what's the importance here, if there's 5 instruments in the arrangement of the music, which one is the lead one, you know, ideally there's one that's driving the thing. So I need to learn it by listening to the rough mix, which also incidentally, it's what they've been hearing for months, sometimes years, you know, so I need to know where we're coming from in order to be, to have an idea of where I want to take it, you know. So the first thing I will get into the Pro Tools session will be actually the rough mix so that I can study it and see what's up, see where the frequency range is sitting, like what kind of frequency response I'm having, how wide it is, how loud it is. That's another thing, you know. If I get a mix that's at -3, I'll have to call them and say, just be aware my shit is going to be quieter than this because it's pointless to have it this loud, you know. Or the other way around, you know, if it's too quiet, the conversation is due. Are we interested in getting volume out of this, or don't we really care? You know, this is also a good moment to ask for references. So if we have, an idea of say a playlist placement for our song, right, or a DJ set after our song, what should be played, or before our song, what should be played, right? To know, okay, we're hitting this kind of world, you know. For electronic stuff, for example, where the kick and the bass sits is very, very important. It has to almost match the references, you know. It's not like, it's kind of that vibe. No, it has to be exactly like that, you know. With some other stuff too, you know, this is a race we are entering, and so when my song's 808 comes in at the club, at a party or whatever, at the playlist, whatever, my shit needs to be as hot or more than whoever came before, you know. That's why they pay me the big bucks, you know. We need to make sure that what I'm giving to them is Grammy-like, it's platinumized, it's bow-tied, you know. So knowing what these references are, because, you know, they could be anything. How many 808s are there on Apple Music right now? It's a billion probably, you know. So I need to know which one, and so, you know, I'll tell them, hey, give me some references of stuff. And sometimes, you know, the comment on that with St. John just the other day, it was like, no references. It's like, we're doing our own shit. It's going to be our own new thing. And I'm like, cool, can do, no problem, you know. So this is the right moment to see, okay, the rough mix is here, the references are here. Most of the time, the references are on a completely different planet. So that's another one of those situations where I have to talk to the creatives and say, okay, you gave me some references, but they got fucking nothing to do with our song. So maybe it's just a vibe, maybe it's just the vocal treatment sometimes, you know. Again, communication is key here, you know. Once I'm kind of aware of where the rough mix is, that's when I start to import everything else, so all the multi-tracks. I like to organize my sessions with music up top, bass, then drums, and then vocals. And in the vocals, I order leads to, you know, the most important to the least important vocals, if there's such a thing. And at that point, the tracks will have no treatment whatsoever, or if the session came from, if the files came in the Pro Tools session with the treatment, I will have the client's treatment in it, active, and I'm going to respect that, you know. So now the session kind of exists. I will make sure I have all my grids right, the markers, everything is lined up clean and, you know, strip silence, all the silence goes away so that I can actually see where the clips are and everything. And I'm very peculiar with how I view my Pro Tools. I like to squeeze all the juice out of my system. So all the real estate graphics, I have a very large monitor in my studio. It's like this wide. It's maybe almost double this. So like I can see the whole 3 minutes and a half or however long the song is from the very beginning. So very often you see me do this kind of number going from here all the way there, to see the big picture stuff. So I like to hide all of this stuff, like all the information about the beats, for example, the minute and second, so that I can maximize my editing thing just like here, all of that stuff. I'm very hardcore when it comes to those things. So now, the tracks are imported from the client. They are imported in my template. My template, though, don't think about it as one of those templates that you buy online that we were talking about earlier, right? It's more like an empty box where all my tools that I very often use are handy, are ready to be picked up really quickly. So no plugins are active, there's no presets or anything like that, right? Everything is ready there and ready to be grabbed. So when I pull up the faders, like I was saying earlier, kind of quietly, most likely it'll be more or less the rough mix as it was presented on the MP3 that I studied, right? And so that's when I start with a blank canvas, basically. I don't like to have treatments that are pre-cooked into the sessions because then it becomes this thing to where whatever settings I got, that's going to be applied on anything that I do. I mix 250 records every year on average. That means that 250 lead vocals will have the same treatment. That's dumb. You don't want to do that, And there's, of course, a tendency of going to the same stuff, and there are some things that I use all the time, like my limiter on my master, for example. That's always set up more or less the same, but that's less of a creative tool, more of a functional tool. So it's fine to use something that's more or less always the same, right? And in fact, if you hear a lot of my mixes, they can wildly. There's a very big array of sounds that in the spectrum they're very, very different. There's a little bit of my signature on all of them, of course. I'm kind of known for my super deep bass and stuff like that, but so I would not suggest to use a template. I would probably make a template for recording, yes, because again, you want to be quick with stuff, right? Especially when you have a celebrity right there, next to you. They don't want to, it doesn't really matter if it's a celebrity or not. They just don't want to wait, right? So if they are asking for a ping pong delay, no problem to have a pre-ping pong delay aux ready to go, right? That's totally fine. But that's one thing, the application of painting a treatment for a mix that will be baked into the song forever and will be heard ideally millions of times. That deserves custom stuff, treated to the song, yeah.
On the mastering bus, on the mastering bus, what would come first, or does it matter? Would it come the EQ, mastering EQ, the mastering compressor, or the limiter? Does it matter what order it falls in?
It does matter because it changes, whenever you're, for example, say you boost 2K on the master, right, on the EQ, and now you have a lot more information in that area. So if there's a limiter, compressor, whatever after that, the detector of that circuitry, the digital circuitry, will behave differently because now we have more of that information. So it's very important. So that's why I've heard this, the question so many times: should I EQ before I compress? Should I compress before EQ? Well, there's no answer to that. It depends on what you're trying to do. On the mix that I did yesterday, I noticed that there was a lack of around like 1600 or something on the entire vocal bus. It might have been with the tone of the singer. It might have been due to the arrangement, or maybe just the performance, or whatever the hell. I don't know. So I had to boost that, because I wanted to make sure that I had an even presentation frequency-wise of the vocals, and that will inform the limiter that I have on the vocal. So in that case, I had to EQ before the limiter because I wanted the limiter to be driven by that area also. So in that case, I needed to do it before. Just imagine it as different tools that do different things. Sometimes your approach is to cut before you sew. Sometimes it's a different way. See whatever is needed, and if you feel like you need that approach at that moment, then that's fine. An example I can give you too is I always run my de-esser before the limiter, so that 1176 I showed you, before it. At some point in the insert, you'll find the de-esser. And you would think, well, why? Like, they're both really dynamic inserts. I mean, the 1176 is applicable to the entire signal. The de-esser most likely only on the high end, but they're both limiters, or compressors, if you will. So my intent with that is I always want to reduce the S's before the compressor, so that the compressor is not triggered by that information. So it's the same kind of thinking. Yeah, I hope that answers.
Irko, do you use parallel compression a lot? Specifically like on vocals?
Parallel compression of vocals, not so much. I have. Just this week, for example, the distortion of the vocal I was mentioning earlier was on a parallel track. And I like to do that because I want to have control on the distortion, which was a heavy, what is it called? The silver plugin? Yeah, it skips my mind right now, but Sansamp, yes, exactly. And that's like a heavy, there is no like mild version of using that plugin. That thing is like prominent. So I wanted to have it separate. Now, although that is somewhat of a dynamic thing, it's not really a compression kind of thing. So I probably wouldn't do it on lead vocals or any vocals, though I have done it before. So if it works, that's fine. Most likely, if you want to retain the dynamic performance of a vocal, imagine like an Adele kind of record or something like that, right? You want to have the dynamic of the performance, but you also are after the intelligibility of every single syllable in the words, right? So in that case, I would probably do it. Keep the lead vocal maybe with a soft light compression, like a Tube Tech or a LA2A, something like that, right? Where the compression is always active, but it doesn't do that much. Maybe the gain reduction at the most is maybe 2 or 3 dBs. But then you can make a parallel where you can have an 1176 completely slammed, and then just blend that in, maybe like a 20-30%, just a little bit, and that will give you like a constant baseline of that vocal. Maybe baseline is not the right word, but like a foundation of that vocal, and then whatever dynamic stuff is happening on top of that is still fine. You're not losing the quietest points. Though I do use parallel compression and treatments vastly on drums, 808s, all the big stuff, no doubt about that. And not only one, it's very often the case where you would see my kick drums with 4 different parallel treatments, and they're each, could be at -20, at -6, sometimes more. But one will have the attack, one will have the body of the kick drum, another one will have only harmonic content in it. So I use parallel all the time. In fact, I use parallel on the entire mix too.
Oh, is it the whole mix parallel?
Say it again?
Whole mix parallel?
Yeah. Yeah. I would do that, run it through tape stuff, I'm trying to channel my inner Dr. Dre here, so I can have a lot of harmonics, but not destroy the mix, Yeah, you had a question, right?
My question was about how do you approach mixing big records? Do you take one song at a time, or do you mix all at once? Just like, as you were saying, you like to paint a whole story. So what's your way of approaching that? And if you do use like one by one, do you find yourself going back and like remixing the first few songs because they like the direction that you took kind of goes a different way than where you started with?
Ideally, if I'm about to do an album, I would like to have all the songs of the album. And I say ideally because that doesn't happen all the time. In fact, most times it doesn't. But it's a lot easier to approach it and that's another thing, to know the track listing, like the actual order of the songs in the playlist or the album. That helps a lot, especially for that paint and picture thing I was talking about earlier, right? Again, in an ideal world, I would go from the biggest record of the album, so whether that's a single or the most powerful track, So whatever that means, it could be the single, it could be the loudest one, it could be the most aggressive one, and then scale down to those that are more quiet moments. Of course, again, that changes a lot. And when I start with the process, if I'm at revision 3, for example, on song 4, whatever, most likely song 3 will have 2 revisions, song 2 will have 1 revision. You know what I mean? So as we go deeper into the project, I get to know the creatives more, so I understand what they are like. And then, of course, we're setting a precedent for all the other songs that will dictate a little bit more of what's going to happen after, And so there will be going back and forth between songs all through the album, up until the very last minute. In fact, when I'm happy with all the mixes, I'll say there's 10 songs, right? And I'm just delivering song 10, and the mix is somewhat approved, I'll still go back and revisit every single one. And in fact, I will make a Pro Tools session with all the latest mixes back to back, so that I can have the experience of actually listening to the album back to back. Because, whenever you switch from one session to the other, you still have that 30 seconds or however long it takes for the Pro Tools session to populate, right? So it takes some time. So I want to make sure that I'm putting myself in the shoes of the listener and have the experience of how the album will actually be heard, And so that takes some time. And you will inevitably notice that going from one song to the other, the vocal balance or the presentation is dramatically different, or maybe not dramatically, but it needs to be fine-tuned a little bit. So usually the last revision of each song of the entire album is to have that, bird's eye view of the thing, and then zoom back in, and go back out, go back in, which is similar to what happens in mixing the actual song, You usually focus on one section of the song, say the chorus, but then the chorus needs to be having a conversation with what comes before it. Say it's the verse. Okay, now I got the chorus done, got the verse done, but how do they bridge from one to the other, Because they need to have, ideally, a level up of the energy, right? Going from, say energy 6 to energy 8, and then if there's like a big drop after, it needs to go to 10. So similar to that vision that you have and you're trying to get through on the mix of the single song, the same thing is applicable to the entire project.
Before mentioning templates. Oh, thanks. Mentioning templates. So when you approach an album, for instance, right? Once you get an approval on like the first song you're working with an artist, love the vocals on this one, cool. That be the reverb and delays for the entire album at that point, or will you still look for other reverbs and delays on different songs within the same album?
This depends on the genre. On a rock project like the one I started doing, it'll be the same one.
Okay.
Because the instrumentation is the same, and we're trying to paint a picture of a band performing in front of you, right? Say at the venue or at the rehearsal space or whatever. So, unless otherwise requested, my thinking is to present them being in a space. Now, if we're talking about a record that's been mostly digitally produced, so that could be anything from pop records to R&B stuff, hip hop stuff, whatever. That's usually not the case. And the goal in that scenario is more, we're trying to, what's the word I'm looking for? Basically, separate and isolate every one of the ingredients of the song so that everything can be heard versus having them being presented in a room, You don't really see, like, if you listen to a 808 based kind of hip-hop production, you're not really picturing it to be performed live in front of you, right? I mean, it will be, but... So no, it's a tailor made kind of thing for the song itself. So delays too, and all of that stuff.
Cool.
Yeah, sorry guys, I'm having a...
You don't want to talking.
I'm usually listening, not talking.
Do you have any sessions up? Do you have any sessions here?
Yeah, well, I have my whole Pro Tools rig here, so we can we can look at stuff, no problem. So yeah, so it depends. Also, it happens very often that if I make a creative decision on, say, putting one sound, one track, whatever, on the right, I may have a mono reverb on the left to kind of balance that out, right? So you still have a presentation like that. So in that case, I wouldn't be able to use the same reverb, the same treatment on every tambourine or every hi-hat or whatever of that album. It really depends. And also based on the role of the vocal too.
I'll ask one more question.
Yeah, go for it.
All right, cool. Since we have like a array of people in the room, what would you say were like you had your journey to success? Are like three things as you start off on your journey before you get to like all these higher end techniques that people can focus on? Like, hey, be mindful of this, and this will get you to a good spot consistently. To be
Right.
consistent, I guess.
I would say references for sure.
Just references.
Yeah, yeah. Load up those references in the actual session that you're working in so that you can quickly go back and forth and see what they've done. Okay, they did that. I got to match it. And in the beginning, it is all about copying it. Like, you got to straight up freaking copy, like make it as precise, as close to that frequency response, as close as that blend and those volumes, right? Then, of course, once you got a little bit more of a hold of what you're doing, then you can start doing your own thing and freestyle and develop your style, develop the way you do things. But in the beginning, references are very important. Also because most likely in the beginning, you're not in the best acoustically created room where, what you're hearing is never really exactly what's coming out of the speakers, unless you're on headphones, but then still you're on headphones. So using references, you see what the behavior of the room based on those references. So if your room, say, is very shy around 100 hertz, that's fine, but you will hear that in the reference. So you you should be after the same thing on your mix too. Your mix should be shy around 100 if that's what the room's behavior is.
Right.
And you would think, oh no, I gotta make it sound as big as possible. Yeah, but you're still in the room, Until you come and work at my place.
I've
So.
seen you.
Where there's no secrets there. And sometimes that's a problem.
I actually have a question. So when it comes to when you first started with your career, were you kind of doing like a lot of free things for people before you became Irko, who you are now? Were you doing a lot of
Yeah.
free work for like people, and then eventually at what point were you like, okay, now I got to start charging because I know my worth, and then as well about branding yourself. How'd you go about that?
I've never seen an SSL console in my early days because in Italy, in my country, there was no SSLs there. And I knew that Dre used SSLs, still uses SSL consoles. And being that 2001 was my album of reference for mixing and the sonics of it, the only way for me to get it was to get my hands on an SSL. So it was impossible. Well, it turns out there's a lot of SSLs in New York. So I was like, well, maybe I should go to New York. And I did. And that's exactly what happened. And when I got there, I've done so much free work. And but calling it free is not right because I had to pay to go there. So really, I paid to work. Imagine that. Oh yeah, let me just pay for flying there, living there, rentals and studio time and stuff like that. So imagine the situation, 20-some years old, pretty much broke, and yet every single dollar that will come in will go completely out. I remember when I opened my second studio, I was maybe 22 or something like that. For maybe like a year, I lived off of my mom's frozen pizzas that she would make over the weekend and then bring them over to me, and I would just stash my freezer with these things. But the funny thing is, I was making like a good, I don't know, maybe the equivalent of what today would be $400 or $500 a day. So I was making a lot of money. And yeah, I was freaking broke completely. You know, I had a old car. You know, I always loved cars. So having like a beat up driver was a problem. You know, for me, for my soul more than anything. But every single dollar that will come in will go either to the studio. So in the beginning stages of Studio Beat 2, it was going to the gear. So, you know, I needed my silver 1176 and I needed my microphones and this and that. But then once that was pretty much dialed in and existing as a proper studio, the next goal was to conquer America. So, you know, so I had to pay a lot of money to work in New York. But, you know, that came back around, you know, 1,000 times. So if there's one thing that I would suggest is to absolutely invest in yourself, 100%. If that means traveling to a place where more of things happen. I mean, you know, you came to LA. That's exactly. I'm sure that stuff is happening in Sacramento too. You know, but you know, LA is like there's a certain gravity that attracts entertainment here, right? Obviously, so any money that's invested in your career, that's how it should be considered, as an investment. Same goes with you know, studios. You know, making your own place, renting places. At the time, it was a lot harder for the gear because any unit was, you know, $2, $3, $4, $5,000, and it was one unit, one mono signal, one. You know, now with digital stuff, it's like you buy it once. And yes, Pro Tools is very expensive, but trust me, it's nothing compared to buying a $400,000 console back in the day, or any of the outboard gear. You know, it's so yes, a lot of free work, and even beyond that, work that I had to pay to do. But then you build a career. That's how, you know, there's some of those guys that I had done free sessions way back then. We're talking about 15, 20 years ago now. I've got Grammys with same guys. And it's not like they weren't paying me because they didn't want to, or I was the last, you know, dude from the boat, which I kind of was. But it was, you know, we're all kind of struggling, growing together, you know, and that's how it happens, you know. It will never or almost never happen that, say, a big celebrity, I don't know, Bad Bunny or something, right, will call somebody that has not done a lot. That doesn't happen, you know. Most likely is he will use a person that's been around him for a long time that gradually kind of grew up with him, you know. So establishing rapport with people and your peers and things like that is very, very important, you know. And chances are, if you're in some class or a school for audio engineering, whatever, out of the 10 guys that you hang out with the most, maybe a couple of them will become as big as you are. And over the years, that will mean Bentleys and shit, you know. It will. I mean, that definitely has happened to me. I don't have a Bentley no more, but I prefer all the cars. But, you know, so yeah, free work, but don't think of it as free. Think of it as I'm investing in my career. I'm putting money into a savings account, you know. You had a question, huh?
Have you ever, the status you're at now, have you ever got a Pro Tools sent back where it's like, no, that's not it. You know, it's not working for you, or it's not working for the artist. They don't feel like you did a great job, or they don't. Have you ever had that situation?
Are you talking about a recording session?
Well, when you're mixing or when you're mastering it, and it just gets sent back because they just don't like what you did, or they just don't feel like you are, you know, your mixer just for them. Have you ever had that happen?
Yeah, of course, of course. There's been situations in which, you know, we start the project and then the drama happens with the artist, so we have to stop, abort the whole thing. And it has happened where it was like an artistic thing, and most likely that has happened because of lack of communication or not enough, you know, of getting on the same page prior to doing the work. Right. And I see that when I am the artist or the client, you know. Right. As I mentioned earlier, I get cars built all the time, right? In that situation, I'm the one that's asking my technicians to do this, do that, do some crazy shit with my cars, you know. And sometimes I've fired people because of that. And so it's the same thing, you know, like you gotta get on the same page and manage expectations and things like that. It has happened before. This was about 10 years ago or so that I did a big record and came out, whatever. That was the first single of I think it was like the first song that this team had produced for this new label with whom they have signed. And record comes out, second single comes out, and I didn't mix it. I was like, what the fuck happened? Like, I just mixed the first one. What happened? So I go and listen to it. And I'm like, oh yeah, no, this sounds okay. And then I go back to the mix I've done, and I heard it on streaming, and there was no bass on the thing at all. So I'm like, yeah, no shit that they're not gonna hire me if they had this for the first one. So then I go and listen to my mix, because this was online, right? I listened to whatever was published. I go and open up my mix, and my mix, as always, it had a huge low end. So I'm like, what the fuck happened? Turns out they hired the in-house mastering house, I guess, for Universal, and this guy mastered my mix, killed all the low end. So of course, it was immediately getting fired because they don't know, they don't have to, it's not their the talent responsibility to figure out, well, why did I lose the 50 hertz bump on my, what they hear, next thing they know is, well, we hired that guy to do it, what the fuck happened? So that was one of those situations where it was out of my control. Nobody told me anything. I delivered my mix. I didn't have a say-so in who was mastering and the mastering process. And that is the last step. That can absolutely cripple all the stuff I've done. So that's an example, right? I do one, and that was it. Why? Well, shit, now I know. So that's when I started mastering my own stuff. I was like, that's not ever going to happen again. There's no way. Other situations, I can think of like a dramatic moment.
Does it kill your ego though when you after someone sends it back like this? I don't like it. How do you keep your mental?
Oh, yes. So again, the communication prior to is the number one thing, right? In any relationship, really, even if it's with your lover or your friends or family, right? The talking, getting on the same page is the most important thing. But I can tell you this. This is like 4 or 5 months ago. I delivered the first mix after doing all my due diligence with getting on the same page, getting the references, talking everything, blah, blah, blah. I sent it in. The artist calls me a few days later. They're like, this is not it. And I'm like, wait, what? Like, it's so much better than before. And I'm partial to this because I did it, but there's a lot of non-opinion-based aspects that we're not considering here. Like, for example, that before there was no tuning on the song, before there was no low end, it wasn't loud enough, blah, 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 blah. They were like, nah, we want it more like the rough. I'm like, okay, no problem, I can backtrack, but tell me what. And basically, they couldn't really word what it was. So I'm like, okay. I was like, well, just figure it out and let me know. And they went silent for maybe like 2 months or something. And then they came back, and they're like, remove all the tuning. And I'm like, okay. And it wasn't like a T-Pain style tuning. It was just correcting wrong notes, So I was like, okay. It's like, no, all of the low-end stuff that you've done, we don't want that. I'm like, okay. And the song's the boss, I always say that the song is the boss. So it's not really the talent. So when talent is asking me something that will not be beneficial to the song, I will let them know. But I will do it because it's their babies we're talking about here, So I can't say no. Like, they're going to get what they want. And sometimes it's just trying it out and having them convince themselves that that's not the way. So I removed the tuning. I removed the low-end stuff. I delivered mix 2, silence for another 2 months or something like, maybe more. I'm like, okay. They call me back 3 months later. It's like, oh yeah, never mind all of that shit we got you do. We're using mix 1. And I was like, well, sometimes they have to explore, They don't know. So, like I said, sometimes I'm dealing with people that are very articulate and that they know exactly what they want, what they're hearing, how to do these things. I have a little bit of a little small paragraph that it explains to everyone that I'm working with how to properly address evaluations of mixes. But do I know that every one of my clients read that little paragraph? It is a little paragraph. It's not like a book, but it is a thing like this, you know. I'm sure they didn't, you know. I had a guy pay me to mix his song 3 times, meaning 3 payments for the same song, because I did the first one. He's like, absolutely not. This is trash. I'm like, okay, let me redo it. He's like, no problem, man. Just ditch it. I'll pay you for another session. I'm like, okay, cool. So I did it, and then I delivered it. And then months later, he asked me for the first mix. I was like, dude, you told me to trash it. I literally deleted it. So he paid me the 3rd time to recreate that first mix. Sometimes it's like, you know, and I'm not saying that to make fun of them. You know, sometimes you just got to explore and see, you know.
Right.
You just don't know,
Right.
you know. So, yeah.
I do that a lot. Personally, I'm sorry.
No.
Use the mic. Make sure.
I'm sorry. Go right
If y'all
ahead.
have questions, make sure you use the mic.
Okay. I do that a lot because basically, I mean, I'm an artist and I always wanted to stay an artist. I didn't want to put any other hats on so I could focus on the best lyrics and whatever. But brain fart right here. I'm sorry about that. Basically, I'm not an engineer, so I don't know what to like a delay. I don't know the lingo, so I can't. I just know what's in my head,
Right.
and sometimes it's frustrating. Sometimes I could see the engineer get a little frustrated because, but then sometimes he'll send it back to me or I'm listening to it and I realize, oh, it's my fault because maybe that day I didn't deliver the main vocal the way I really wanted to. Maybe it's I'm on the clock, and so yeah. I appreciate hearing that.
No, of course. And sometimes the requests that may come, I'll be like, no. But then I try it. I always try it. And most of the times it actually fucking works. And so it's like, but that also, it depends on the personality of the mixer too, I consider myself a lot less of a techie kind of guy, like all of the Pro Tools stuff. We'll talk about it, of course. And I do that every day, obviously. But that's not where it's at for me. For me, the mixing is where the soul of the song comes out, and that of course is coming through numbers, yes, and limiting and EQ and all of that, but no one will see it that way. And that's why the most important thing is how the audience will digest the stuff, and the way they do it is by listening to it. They're never going to see any visuals for it. All of this stuff, it's only for us to see, right? So I'm a lot more of mixer that's driven by vibe and energy and the content of the song rather than the numbers and things like that. Though, of course, the conversation with the numbers has to happen at some point, of course. You had a question, right?
Yeah, one right here, and then we got you.
Okay.
So this is kind of a different question regarding like building your own studio.
Yeah. Oh boy.
It's kind of a different pace here, but let's say I was building my own studio and I have the chance to customize everything regarding the dimensions, like the wall, pretty much everything. How would you go about, or what would you recommend as far as like the room size, the shape, regarding like listening and tracking, and like how to, I guess, kind of learn a little bit more about the acoustics involving the setup?
Yeah. All right. So the acoustics conversation, and that's a very huge area of expertise. So I can tell you the way I did it. I don't know if it's fitting for everybody. In fact, I think it isn't. But the way I did it is I auditioned acousticians first. Meaning I went to different places for 15 years to work, and every time I would find a room that would translate properly, I would make a note of who designed that room. The same thing I would do in a black book of when the room did not translate. Be like, okay, who did that? Okay, cool. I need to stay away from that acoustician, So that's the first thing I would say. Talk to somebody that does this every day. If there is a budget in mind, say $100 to do a studio, I would say that the allocation of efforts should be 80% of that 100 should go into the acoustic stuff. Design number one, but you'll find that the designing is not that expensive. It's the construction, the building of the acoustical devices will be the dramatic, most expensive things. Don't make the mistake of spending all the money on the speakers. That's stupid. Don't do that, because the speakers are only half the equation. And the other equation, which is the acoustics of the room, is the most expensive. It's the one that's very difficult to change, and that will have an imprint on anything that will be made in there. Recording, mixing, anything, even talking, you know. The next thing will be the building part. If you're starting with a building that exists, then you gotta work with the dimensions that are given, So ceiling height, very, very important, and of course the material. The way I've gone about building Studio Beat 3 is I made everything in concrete. That's the most expensive way to go about it, the most difficult way to go about it, but it's also the most performing because there's a lot of mass, and audio or sound is vibrations. It's actual energy. So the more you have mass, the more you can control this information. It's not for everybody. Not everybody can have a concrete building being built. It's difficult. It's very expensive. It's very lengthy. And with me, I had to live through the drama of dealing with city permits, all through and through for years, guys. Not like months, years. So it's a lot, and it costs a lot. But that being said, I would say, explore what the personnel that you're going to be working with has done before. If you can't afford to go that route and you got to kind of do it on your own, there's going to be a lot of trial and errors, and it will not be performing as if a professional will make it. There's no way around it. It's like the difference between having a fast car and a Formula One car or a NASCAR car, whatever. It will just never be performing as those cars. Obviously, you're comparing some, the most expensive car that you can kind of rig together is probably, like $200,000 or something. You can compare that to a Formula One that's $7 million. It's impossible, that you just, but you got to work with what you got, most likely, all right? So make the best of it and put the most money into the acoustic stuff. And speakers, plugins, compressors, leave that to last. They are not going to make money, or they're not going to be as useful as being able to hear it.
So I guess just kind of in another question, you were kind of going more off of feeling than like a specific like golden ratio for like the placements of everything, or
For mixing?
as far as like the acoustics, I guess, of your final room. I guess, how did you know when you were like, okay, this is what I want?
Studio building, or designing rather, is just like baking. It's not about taste or whatever. It's a science that is based on the chemistry. So acoustics, it's a numbers game, 100%. So that's why I'm saying talk to somebody that knows and does this every day. Because if you just guess it, you're just guessing it. It's not, you know what I mean? I'll give you an example. I have like some of the loudest speakers ever in my room. It can easily go to above 110 decibels, and that's perfect sound, not distortion, nothing. So my back wall right there is a size is more or less like this. The width. It's a lot taller though. My room is 12 feet tall, and imagine it's concrete. And that back wall has a bass trap. I kid you not, it's probably this deep. Meaning behind the guys in the back, that deep, and it goes all the way up. And I have one big one that's the size of a very large bed. Imagine like a bed standing up like that, and this deep, like I said, is very, very deep. And then all around it is bass traps for all kinds of different frequencies and stuff. I cannot take credit for any of this shit. Like the acoustic study of the space that we have, that we had available to build the studio in, dictated the size of this, in accord with the fact that I had, two 18-inch subwoofers built in the front wall plus 212s up top. So that's, you know, a massive, it's humongous amount of energy that needs to be channeled and contained in the back. Because if not, it comes back to you, and that creates cancellations, and you losing the 100 hertz like I was saying earlier. You know. So yeah, I don't know. Long story short, you know, studios cost a lot of fucking money because of all of this. It's very, very expensive stuff. So try to, you know, make the best of it. I don't want to sound like I'm discouraging you. You know, it took me like 20 years to build my ultimate place, and it sounds incredible, but you know, it took a long time to get there. You know, or you can just use my place, I guess. There's a lot of engineers that work out of there, you know, so that's the reason. There was a question, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm kind of going back a bit into the payment side of things that you mentioned. There are mixed projects that will drag on for a few months because of lack of communication. You mentioned the guy that paid you 3 times, but how do you generally approach that side of things? Do you like take a upfront fee, or like maybe half upfront and then, or like do you charge for revisions? How do you go about that whole thing?
Right. So a lot of my colleagues have different approaches to this. Everybody needs to find their way to go about it, and same will be applicable to you guys. I can tell you the way I do it, which is the first step usually happens with the client reaching out to either me or my management, and that's when we request for the material to be heard by me. I can give you the exact logistics of the whole thing if you want, but basically it's important for me to hear the material to see, assess whether if I'm the right guy for it, first of all. Like, I want to be mixing stuff that I actually like. This has changed over the years, of course. In the beginning, I had rent due, you know, but nowadays it's I only work on stuff that I like. So that's the first step. The second step would be to gather the files. So the thing I was saying earlier, preparing the session. At that point, that's when payment is being handled, full payment, 100% of the payment. There's no 50-50 or whatever, because like you were saying, sometimes, you know, it's 3 days turnaround, no problem. Sometimes it's, 3 months turnaround. Sometimes it's years, you know, it really depends. So payment is processed, session is booked, we go to town. Takes me about a full day to mix a record, so say 10 hours on average, right? And then I deliver the mix, and then that's when the revisions start to come. Revisions are free. I don't charge for them. Imagine, you know, when I'm in the position of talking to a artist that's doing a rendering for my cars, and I just need a different bumper, and the third bumper still doesn't do it, I need a fucking fourth bumper, you know? So I like to approach it the same way, you know? So I'd rather charge a little bit more to offer, you know, peace of mind to the client and myself too, to just know that I can afford to do another revision without talking about money, you know? Now this changes for working with major corporations. So all the big labels never pay up front. But again, this depends on the situation, but usually there's a PO that's being issued. It's a purchase order, right? Where basically they say, okay, we have allocated this amount for this. Could be a song, a recording session, or a full album, whatever, or the entire recording budget. And when you have that, even though you might not have the money in the bank, it's basically like having money in the bank. We have a large corporation that agreed to hire you for these services, or your studio, whatever the case, for this amount. You might not even need, most of the times there is no contracts, even, you know, sometimes there is, but just like sometimes there's NDAs, most times there isn't. It depends also on who you're dealing with. So for that, payment usually comes after. Most of the times a lot later. And so that's, it's growing pains of dealing with a lot more money that's coming in, but you might have to wait 6 months sometimes, you know. And there's some negotiations at some points too. You know, with independent artists, usually there isn't, because I have a lower rate for independent artists, so it's more of a digestible kind of budget. With major labels, there's usually different numbers, and also less negotiations. With huge celebrities, the rate goes even higher because there's a lot of more. They're high maintenance, not in a bad way. There's just more involved, I gotta shield myself from hackers and make sure we have no locations on phones and devices because they might pop up in front of the studio, that kind of thing. But usually, if it's a full album, there's more negotiations. Granted, like there's a difference between doing one song versus doing 25. Of course, this is a lot more work. But the money stuff, will happen eventually. Normally, it just kind of grows. The more plaques are going up on your walls, the more the rate can go up, and you can be more selective with stuff. That's why I was saying that earlier in my career. I would mix all kinds of trash. Like it didn't really mean, like what I mean. Like I just had to make it happen for my career. But then as things progressed, and now I have way bigger clients in my email that are asking for work. So, like I said, I grew with them. So, but yeah, the money thing is interesting too. Because it's a completely different realm of, like, it has nothing to do with music. So you got to be very good at, doing chords progressions, just like you need to do lyrics and producing and engineering and recording and being good at computers in general. And money is usually all the way over there. It's a completely different thing. And you'll see usually as the careers grow, the teams grow too. So for example, I have management team is a set of guys that do just that. And then I have my engineers, my chief house engineer, my engineers in the studio that are there to support any needs for any session, mine or other engineers or other producers. And then you have the accountant people that are completely removed, and it's a middle-aged lady for me that has got nothing to do with music, And then also as the money grows, more money comes in, but a lot more money goes out too, namely for my building, erecting a building in Los Angeles, even more so in Pasadena. Whew! So everything becomes more, even structuring the entities, you can totally start in the beginning with a DBA or not even maybe, and then maybe graduate to LLC, eventually, graduate to a corporation, and, and this will be changes that are usually informed by the teams that are around you, and what they advise you on. So it's a full-time job for sure, for sure. It's a lot. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was going to ask, and I'll pass it to you. But, real quick, Irko, before I ask the question, would you have some time, probably after lunch, to show us the session?
Yeah. That's why I brought my rig. Yeah.
Whose stems do you have?
Whatever I have open right now.
I was curious.
Couple things.
Okay, but I guess my question, since we're kind of more on like the kind of the style, kind of trajectory, is like, what would you say to a lot of people who are like me? I'm a more kind of budding and new. I've been doing it for a couple of years. It's like a mixing engineer. How to stand out in maybe an area like in audio and mixing where it could be seen as oversaturated, and a lot of people there are a lot of mixing engineers, different calibers.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe for an example, when I thought about you was like how do you maybe like what would you say to like a more of a newer engineer that's trying to stand out? And then like an example would be for you with like how are you different from Mike Dean? Where I know Mike, it's either you or Mike Dean, from my understanding, that are kind of like the go-to hip-hop mixing engineers.
I would say, you got to find your niche, find your personality, your persona, your suit, if you will, your signature sound, whatever it is, you. And I would say, and this is, by the way, applicable to any entrepreneur or creative, really, it's about figuring out what suit you can comfortably wear every day forever and just rock with it, because that's everyone else is taken, right? So you can't take somebody else's thing. Chris Lord Alge's thing is the hat, and he usually wears black in terms of the looks, and the way he mixes is very, very fast on the console. That's his thing, right? I clearly have the bow ties and the car thing going on. You know, that's my quirk, I guess. That's my little thing. And in terms of the signature sound, my stuff is usually known for the super, super deep low end. I'm very, very particular about the low end information and the vibe of the thing more than the technicalities, you know? So I can't tell you what you should do, like what your thing would be, but maybe your thing is the gray hoodie, you know? Maybe your thing, you know? And that could be a thing, you know? I'm also like, you know, the you know, blue eye Italian dude with the bow tie in a crowd of people that usually don't look like me. You know, I'm like that odd guy out. You know, but that's because I formed my DNA as a mixer with hip hop music because at the time it was the music that had the biggest low end, the biggest bass, right? And so that informed my taste in music so much that now I am sought after by the very same guys that I grew up listening to, which is really strange if you think, especially coming from another country, you know. But I think the disadvantage of that, of coming from a different place, played an interesting role in how I digested that aesthetic. Because when listening to hip hop music before I started learning English, it sounded like no words. It sounded like blah 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 blah. So there was nothing else but sonics and audio for me to digest. And then only later, when I started learning English, I discovered the beautiful culture that's around hip hop music. You know, but before it was such a distant, like a very distant geographically and culturally thing for me. You know, seeing Murder Was the Case. You know, Snoop's mockumentary, I think it was, or a document, whatever that was. It was such a it could have been on Mars for all I know. It was that distant, you know. But because I digested that the music, the language of music before the language of English, I became that, and that was my thing, you know. And it's very, very comfortable for me to do that. By the way, there's nothing forced or anything like that, you know. So yeah, find out what your thing is and go with it. You know, every person has its own thing. If I think of Tony Maserati, was definitely a very influential personality and sound for me growing up. He was the one that really put parallel compressor, the New York style of parallel treatment for drums that identify boom bap hip hop from New York mostly, way back then, right? So that was definitely a thing that made put him on the map. But there's so much more than only just the techniques on Pro Tools and whatnot, right? There's a lot that goes into the personalities of people and how they like to interact with others, and even the looks. Like all these mixers have their own little thing going on, you know, whatever that is, you know. Shep's got the Gandalf thing going on, right? That's his thing, you know. And when he talks, he speaks like him too, like so prophetic, you know. Yeah, there's like so many different people, you know. So yeah, find your thing and go with it, you know, and make it be you, because everyone else is thinking already, you know.
All right, I have two questions. So first question is going back to the payment thing. So in the case you mentioned where they're like, yeah, this is not it, and when they don't want to like go forward with it, do you just like give them back the money, or in the sake of the relationship, to keep that relationship alive, or are you like, oh well, I still worked, so I need this much payment either way?
Right. So before engaging with any new client or even established client, my guys at the office will dictate how we proceed with all of this. So, for example, we'll let them know, hey, yes, you gotta pay up front. So you pay up front, so you're kind of like out on limb to trust us, you know. So that's on you. Do you want to trust us? Yes or no? That's totally fine. Usually it's a yes, because I've been around for 20 plus years, so it's not like I'm known for pulling a fire fest on people. You know what I mean? Just ask around. It's not So in that paragraph, we'll show exactly how everything will be handled. and I will do that. I have done that. I'm a trustworthy kind of person. I say what I'll do, and I'll do what I have said, and that's what it is. Um, they don't want to use the mix. That's on them. I did it. So no money back. No, fuck that. No, I did the work, and we got on the same page, and I'm even offering you unlimited revisions. So, I did the work. Same thing happens when I'm on the other side of things. If I'm asking my upholstery guy to do the interior like this, and then he does it, and I don't like it. Well, I'm gonna have to pay him again to do differently. If he comes up with some shit, then that's different. But,
Okay.
yeah.
All right. And my other question, going back to the studio, like I mentioned, I have a studio out in Long Beach. It's my second version because the first one we actually got kicked out because they sold the building, and I didn't have a lease or anything. So I'm on my second one, and although I like how it came out, there's definitely a lot that I would want to do better. My question to you is, when you did your studio third version, are you taking out a loan for everything, or are you kind of paying out of pocket, like investing your own money into it?
Right. So my setting is a little bit complicated because I have several companies, right? So one company owns the real estate, the building, and then my audio company operates out of it. So you see what I mean? It's a little bit different. But I would say absolutely take business loans because, all interest rates, they are fully deductible for your business purpose. And it becomes a healthy expense that a business can have for a prolonged amount of time. And the more you have those, assuming of course you're in the green, you can do more. So you're basically renting other people's money to operate your business, and that's rent is the fucking key.
Yeah. And are you like heavily involved in the studio? Like, do you rent it out, and are you like commercial, or are you doing any marketing, or you have a whole team behind you?
Right. So my studio is a commercial facility, yeah. So it can be rented by producers, engineers, whoever. I don't have a website, a public website where it's like all these commercial studios that you can rent. I'm assuming these guys have a website where you can just book too, right? I don't have that because I like to keep it within my circle of people. So it's usually high-end clients that don't really want to get into a commercial facility where they might bump into somebody at the cafeteria, which could be cool, but sometimes you gotta separate a little bit. Especially the mega celebrities, don't, they usually don't show up at places where they can be next to somebody else. You know what I mean? So yeah, no, commercial studios. I got 2 rooms, so they're booked for just about anything from writing to production to recording to immersive audio for Atmos, and of course mixing. And I usually take the morning slot of the big studio, so 9, 10 a.m. to maybe 6 or 7 or so, and then I'm out of there. And usually my chief house engineer takes over the big studio with vocal tracking normally. And then there's the graveyard shift. That's usually either mixers or producers or people that don't really have people coming over. They're just by themselves. And the same goes for 2 studios. So yeah, plenty of sessions and stuff like that. We do 8-hour sessions at my place, usually not 12, which is kind of like the standard. Does that answer your question?
That's awesome.
All right, so my question is going to bring it back to the mixing side. So you are the low end guru. So my problem, or one of my problems, is with low end, especially with 808s or 808s in conjunction with the kick and whatnot. So what are some good practices that you could bestow onto me or us here as a group to really get those 808s to hit hard and cut through, but not fight with, let's say, the kick, or let's say you have an 808 or even an acoustic bass or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. So you have to be very, very strategic and decisive with low end placement because there's not a lot of frequencies available to us down there. Oh no, okay. Oh, I thought this was gonna mess it up. So let's go really large. See, from, imagine, right, from here, sorry, here, from there to here, the difference between these two peaks is 3,000 hertz. That means there's 3,000 different cycles from 2,000 all the way to 5. 3,000 places where we can sit things.
Yeah.
If we go here, say we do, I don't know, say the deepest usable frequency I would say is like maybe 30, and that's being very, you know, yes, very generous. So from here to here, this is 100 and this is 30. There's 70 of them. Look, it's the same space. Here we got 3,000. Here we got 70. That's a major difference.
Yeah.
So we got to be very, very mindful of where we're sitting stuff down here. So assuming we can say that bass starts, I don't know, maybe say at 200 or so. I'm just picking a number. It doesn't have to be that way. But within this area here, most likely we will have to fit a kick drum, at least the format of it, an 808, maybe even a bass, like a live bass guitar. That's 3 things that need to occupy a slice that's like what, 200 hertz or whatever altogether? No, not even, maybe 150. It's very, very, it's a very narrow space. Also, most likely all of this information will be mono, so there is no stereo here. So it's one place in the, you know, in the 3D landscape of the mix. And it's very, very narrow. So we gotta be very decisive. So this is where the entire conversation about side chaining or frequency filtering and all of that will begin. So how do we go about this? We gotta look and study the tracks that are put together our song, right? And see, okay, our 808, assuming it's different notes, will be from 62 to 83. Those are like the range of the 3, 4 notes, whatever, that 808 will be playing through our song. So now I know that that space will be occupied by the 808. So let's say it's, I don't know, 40 to 80. Here, I'm just using these as visualizers, okay, not as an EQ, okay? So this is our 808 space. Okay, cool. Now we got the kick. Let's see where the kick naturally is. Most likely, if the producer did a good job, they placed the kick drum above where the 808 is sitting, right? So hopefully the format will be, say, I don't know, a 90 or something like that. Okay, so now we have kick drum area, 808 area. If there's also a live bass, and I'm saying that because the mix I did yesterday actually was built like that, the live bass naturally lived also in the same area, and we cannot have that. And obviously, if I gotta make somebody win the sub information contest between a live bass and an 808, it'll be the 808 that wins it, okay? Because it's a lot more present, it's a lot, you know, it's digitally generated usually, so it will be performing a lot better that way. So what do? So I ran the bass onto a distortion plugin, something that emulates a pedal or the head, or, you know, the harmonic content is being driven. So it goes from a deep note that sounds like to something that sounds more like, you know, vibrations and stuff like that. Which means that now the live bass will be occupying all this area, generally speaking, okay? So this is a static positioning. So we're being very mindful of where we're sitting stuff. And we are trying to make sure that there's as much separation between each of these elements in the low end as possible, so that they don't interfere with one another. Now granted, if we have if we have the 808 only live in here, that means that there's no information regarding that instrument up here in the mid range. So it will be a good technique to duplicate the same track and do a parallel treatment where we have a lot of harmonics generated, so that when we're listening to the mix on the phone or something where there's not naturally a lot of sub information, somebody can still figure out where the bass is, you know. Now, in the case of the other day where I also had a live bass, that took that role. So in a situation where somebody's listening to the mix on small speakers, they will vibe out to the live bass. If they have a big system, they will vibe out to both the live bass, but also the air moving sub information.
Yeah.
Okay.
I want to keep it on the technical side. As far as your ears go, I understand that's the most important thing in the studio is your ears. It's one of the most underrated. So in the studio, I know you're supposed to listen to it on like a low level, but when you get to the vehicle, are you supposed to listen to it loud, or are you supposed to keep it also low when you're trying to listen to the end result inside the car?
Right. So of course, the louder you get to listen to the mix, the more appreciation of everything that gets in there, and you can make decisions better, right? So that goes for everything: earbuds, headphones, speakers, cars, whatever, studio, whatever, right? But the downside of that is that your mileage, when you're at loud volume, gets reduced dramatically, like very, very quickly. So, I always check my mix pretty loud at some points, but just sporadically and throughout the mixing day, ideally towards the end. Because, once you blast it, you're just frying your ears and everything sounds amazing. But at the same time, you're also more into the mix. So, it's a give and take. So my suggestion will be like, for the vast majority of time, do medium loud, medium plus, so louder than conversation level, but not too much, so that if we could have this conversation with the song playing, right? And then occasionally go to, more of a happy moment for volume. Right. Now that of course depends on the speakers too, when you have a full range set of speakers where you probably don't need to blast it as much, But if you only have smaller speakers, see, even these guys are large. I'm talking about like an NS10 style kind of speaker. It's kind of pointless to blast your ears off with that because you just end up going like this because it's too loud. You know what I mean? And in the car, same thing. Same thing in the headphones. So yeah, like my rule of thumb is keep it medium. Occasionally you go up. And when the clients come in, yeah, you blast the shit. But I also go in the back of the room, because there's a difference, especially when going real loud,
So back to the low end, I've noticed that with certain 808s, like the very low 40, 50 hertz will be really low. And I don't know if this just really has to do with the speakers and maybe like the tuning of the room, but I've noticed that when you get to the low frequencies, they're low, but then you get to those mid, like it just gets really loud. How do you like go by mixing that so that the level stays consistent and you don't get those spikes in the 808s?
Right. You're right. So this goes back to that reason. Whenever you have a note being played here, you're playing like a bundle of frequencies that's maybe 3,000-4,000 of those frequencies. When you're playing it down here, it's like 2. So it's a lot less, So as you get up in the notes, ideally, if you play the 808, note by note, going from down here all the way up here, you should be able to see a decrease in intensity over here. Because naturally, at 40, 30 hertz, it'll be a long frequency. So as you get up, you gotta like scoop it down a little bit. So in the case of whenever the 808s do these really cool octave glides kind of thing, like when they go like woo, that kind of thing, yeah, you gotta turn that shit down. You gotta.
Is that just EQ or?
Yeah, probably depends on the situation, of course. But I would say that you would probably do something like this.
Would you use the dynamic section or would you just cut it out completely?
I would do something like this, or the reverse. Actually, that's probably better. Um, this thing is not doing what I want it to do. There you go. Something like that. And I would do it with a very, I'm exaggerating things now, of course, but I would do something like that. Dynamic, it could be a dynamic thing, yes. It could be an automation thing too. It depends on what kind of treatment you got going on. But be mindful that of that thing. I mean, you noticed it already, so you know it's there. Yeah. So the way to go about it, it changes. You know, it's up to you to see what's the best way to approach it. You know.
All right. We're coming to a close with the first half of this seminar here, this masterclass with Irko. Can we do one more round of applause for Irko? Thank you, thank you, thank you. This has been so fantastic so far. We have pizza ready for lunch. We're going to do like a short little lunch break before we break into the second half. Before we do, I want to ask a question. And then I want everybody, like just a few people in the room, to share one awesome thing that they learned that they're going to take away from. But the question that I want to ask you is actually, you and many other higher-end mix engineers talk about the value of mixing the soul of the music. Create, not necessarily technically, but feeling the song. So one, why do you think these top-level guys tend to care less and less over the years about the gear? Right. And how do people that are less experienced get to the point where they can think about the creative and less about the technical?
Mm-hmm. That's very true. That's a very interesting thing that you noticed. I think it's because I was kind of saying that earlier. The gear, the knobs, whatever, it's like, well, so what? It's just conclusive to a piece of art that will be resonating with people driving in traffic, kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like, they don't care about the numbers. They care about how important it is what's being communicated to them and how they like it and how, is there goosebumps here or no? That's kind of like the question, right? And the soul of the song, as he was saying really well, I think it's about not plopping in the first plug-in, second three into listening to the record, you know, but really understanding the song. What are we saying here, you know? What is this intended to be digested as, you know? And that has nothing to do with the limiters or the compressors and stuff. And not to knock it, like I said earlier, we do need all of that stuff, but that's not where it's at. I don't think so, you know? When Ye called me the first, after hearing the first mix that I did for Donda, he said that he was elated by the mix. He didn't say anything about my 1176, you know. He was just elated by the mix, and I get it, you know. Again, to go back to my car stuff, I'm the same way. I don't care how they connected my new engine to the Cadillac. I just want to see it work and be happy about gunning it if I want to, you know. I don't know this. I mean, I kind of know how an engine works, but you know, it's not my role to know that. So I think that's what it is. You know, it's a piece of a packet of communication that's being channeled through music, and that's what a song really is. You know.
How do you think younger engineers can get to that point?
Yes, yeah.
To think creatively.
Yeah, I think there's a degree of sitting back and saying, what is this song telling me? And forget about the actual specific minutia of the techniques and okay, I need to set my compressor to 12 to 1. Well, I guess, yeah, but what is that saying to you? You know, what is the vibe saying to you? So I think it's a matter of learning that you know, of course, the most important thing is the mechanics of what we're doing. That's what we're selling. Yes, I get it. But in the long run, it's not about that. It's about music being communication.
Amazing. Perfect. All right, so as we break for our second half here, I think the pizza, Dami, can you check if the pizza is ready? I want 3 people to share one thing that they're going to take away. One thing that they're going to take away for the rest of their life.
What I'm going to take away is is being in the room with all of you guys. And I feel like we hit the lottery to be in front of this guy.
Oh, thanks.
And does everybody go home and realize, man, you got a gift and don't sleep on it, you know? Forget the money, just keep doing what you're doing. Like, I love doing this, and nobody could pay me to do what I do. It's not enough money in the world.
Right.
I'd say probably the investing in yourself, because a lot of times it's very easy to, you know, take a step back and be like, dude, I've wasted so much money. I'm kind of feel like I'm not going anywhere. Even if you are, and you look back and you're like, oh, in 5 years, like,
Yeah.
look how far I came. But it's easy to forget that all the money that you put in, or all the free work, it's all an investment, and it will pay back in the future.
And I'll take it a step further too. Even if it doesn't ever come back, even if the career goes to total shit, you still have had the time of your life. You learn so much. Come on, man. Like, that's fucking life, you know? So even if nothing comes back, man, it's still a great investment. It's your life.
Yeah.
Look at what it brought me, you know? It took me to the other side of the planet and shit. So yeah, no doubt.
One more person.
I got one.
I really appreciate the business you brought to it. We think a lot about music, and we're all creatives here, and we forget the business a lot of times. You talking about your corporation owns a corporation, you rented that was smart. That was amazing. Because I'm incorporated, I was like, oh, that's such a good idea.
Yeah.
So that stuck with me. I think you should do a book on that. Or you should talk about that at some point in your life, too.
Oh, we can go.
Because that'd be an
more in
amazing
depth,
story
yeah.
for you to come here from another country and then you build up to this. And yeah, the business part is really important.
I
So thank you.
appreciate that. Yeah, it is, of course. Without it, you know, we can't keep going.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, pizza break, y'all.
Pizza break.
Woo!
Everybody. Thank you so much.
All right.
And with that, we will be right back. The stream will be rolling, but we are going to take about a 15 to 30 minute long pizza break. In the meantime, why don't you tell your mom you love her? Why don't you go spend time with your kids? Why don't you get a carb load, and then go on a 10-mile run or something? I don't know. Get your shit together. All right. And we'll see you back here actively in about 15 to 30 minutes. Maybe you'll catch some random conversations. Maybe I should turn off the mics because someone's going to find out that the mic is on and they're going to spew some ridiculous shit and then realize that it was live streamed the entire time. But the point is, we will be right back. Stay right in your seats. Make sure you follow In the Mix Studios on Twitch. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. This video will be live on YouTube. This video will be live on YouTube afterwards. Oh, here I am. Yes, it will be live on YouTube at some point in its entirety. And we will have George T split it up because he does it so much better than we do. Shout out to you, George. And we're really excited for the second half here. We'll see what we kind of get into. Otherwise, please, yeah, like eat some spaghetti or something. Ooh, pasta salad. That sounds great. Especially because we're talking about Italy. I don't know. Irko's the man. Welcome back to In the Mix Studios. Enjoy your 15 to 30 minute break.
Purchase. Yeah. That was like a purchase, bro.